All right, guys, happy Saturday and welcome into the Alabama pregame show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. I'm Simone Eli alongside John Talty today, the sports editor at AL.com, filling in for Matt Scalisi. John, happy Saturday, week 11 of the college football season. We were talking a moment ago. It is just flying by. It finally feels like fall outside. It's a little chilly, at least down here in Mobile. What are things like over there?
Yeah, it's a beautiful day so far here. I'm glad that we're finally getting a little bit of that fall weather. I think the other day it was like 75 degrees here, and it's nice, but it's like I like little 50, 60, so we're kind of heading that direction finally.
Yes, it feels like actual football weather for those of you headed to the game today in Tuscaloosa. Kickoff set for 11 o'clock. The Crimson Tide host New Mexico State, taking a break from SEC play this week for a little bit of a tune-up. We're going to get to all of that in just a moment. But kickoff at 11 o'clock. The game is on the SEC Network. The second-ranked Tide hosting New Mexico State, week 11 of the season. And I want to talk quickly, John, about the playoff rankings that came out. We talked last week with Matt when it first came out. Alabama still number 2 in the rankings. I would say that judging based on the rest of college football right now, that's exactly where the Tide belong.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make an argument maybe that Oregon can be ahead of them just because of their win over Ohio State. But I think that's the thing that, that I've kind of come to a similar conclusion is that, like, you watch Alabama, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, and they don't necessarily look like, what you would typically think is the number 2 team in the country. But there's so many other issues with these other teams that it's hard to make that many good arguments about teams ahead of Alabama. Again, I think Oregon might be one of them, but it really feels like it's Georgia clearly number 1, and then Alabama's probably number 2, in part just because nobody else has really emerged as that clear-cut number 2 team.
No question. So today, the Tide looking to tune some things up coming off of that win over LSU. But what a win that was. Let's look back at that game briefly. Bama really survives is the best word that I feel like we can use to describe what that game was like at Bryant-Denny Stadium last Saturday night. They get it done in a 6-point win, I believe it was, over the Tigers. And LSU had every opportunity to win the game down the stretch. I mean, I remember at least 3 drives where they were driving to score to tie or take the lead. And John, it felt as though the defense stood tall, but there's still a lot of question marks with this team right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been waiting for this team to kind of flip the switch all season, and it still hasn't happened. And I think watching that LSU game, I think there's even more, reason to question whether it's ever going to happen. I think it happened for the defense in the second half. Will Anderson, we all know he's incredible. They had multiple big stops, and they were able to do what they needed to do. But that offense still has issues. You can tell me stats wise it's doing great, but when you watch them, there are clear issues there. The offensive line has problems. I mean, the running game was terrible against LSU. And so there's still some questions with this team that I think were certainly evident in that LSU game. And, listen, they won, and that's, all that really matters in the end. But, Ed Orgeron, I think, has now made multiple comments about how he thought LSU was the better team. And watching that game, I think it was a fair argument. Like you said, I mean, they had opportunities, and if they were just a little bit more confident on offense, they probably should have won that game. And so there's some reason for concern with this Alabama team.
Let's talk about this offensive line really quick. There was an injury, some injuries up front, and there has been throughout the season. But when you look at that number, 6 rushing yards, and you think about how many times Bryce Young was sacked, I want to say maybe 4 times, but just felt like the guy was running for his life a lot, in the dirt a lot, something that is just kind of different, not the sort of thing that you see from Alabama teams week in and week out. If there's or year in and year out, really, if there's a part of this program that has been consistent for years, it feels like that's in the trenches. That was not the case last week. How much of a concern do you believe that was in practice this week going into New Mexico State? How much do you think that is going to be an area of wanting to see some tune-up for Nick Saban now before resuming the SEC schedule?
Yeah, I think it's an important thing. And, I know, I talked to, our beat writers, Michael Casagrande and Mike Rodek, about this earlier in the week. Like, I don't necessarily know what the fix is, because they've rotated some guys in. I don't know if at some point a game like this, and, I'm sure Nick's not listening to this, but if he is, like, I don't want to get in trouble saying that the young kids are going to play, but that is what's probably going to happen in this game. And maybe you see something playing some of those younger offensive linemen that gives you some confidence to play them more down the stretch, because they've signed a lot of highly regarded offensive line recruits. They haven't played much this year, and I think that's maybe they're the future, but they haven't, been the present. And maybe we see some in this game, whether it's, the Brockmeyer or somebody like that, that they can play them more down the stretch, because it's been a problem. And what's kind of amazing about it, Simone, is that they have a guy on that offensive line who's probably going to be a top 3 pick in the NFL draft, in Evan Neal. I mean, that's an incredible piece. Yeah. But as a whole, it just has not been very good. I think clearly they're missing people like Landon Dickerson, who was really the heart and soul of that team, and just was so good in the middle of the offensive line for them last year.
Yeah. When it comes to year, it's so easy for fans, for media alike, to kind of compare teams year to year and the clientele and the recruits that come in and what things look like. And Saban has had no issue. He's not fallen off when it comes to recruiting whatsoever. But it does seem as though Alabama was a little spoiled the last few years when it comes to position skill guys. I mean, if you think about what this receiving core has looked like the last couple of years, I mean, it's been pretty unbelievable. This season, Jameson Williams, see the stats up there, brought up by our guy Patrick Greenfield behind the scenes. I mean, he's been impressive, but kind of at times a one-hit wonder. John Mechie in there when he wants to be, and it just seems as though there are not as many weapons at Bryce Young's disposal as there maybe has been for Bama in the last few years.
No, I 100% agree. I mean, I think you can say the same thing about the running back position as well. I mean, just how spoiled, Mac was last year of Najee, and, before that, some of the, Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, all these different receivers all these different running backs that they've had. And, like you said, the receivers, I mean, there were time they had 4 first-round wide receivers on the team at one point. And, I think Jameson Williams is, if you follow the draft stuff, is probably moving up his stock. But as a whole, they don't have those weapons. Jalen Billingsley has been very disappointing. I think Saban hasn't hidden the fact that he's been disappointed in his performance. And John Mechie, I think everybody thought he was going to be the guy, and that's just not really who he is. I think he's a good, possession type receiver, but he's not really that home run threat that I think people thought he might be. Sure. I think Jameson Williams gives you that. But yeah, I think there's been a lot more pressure on Bryce to do things, which I think is also why you were talking earlier about, his ability. He's having to run more. I don't think he necessarily wants to. I think you saw earlier in the season, he wasn't necessarily comfortable doing that, but he just has to do that at times to get the offense moving. And so there's just a lot more challenges, I think, with this team than last year. And like you said, I mean, there was just so much talent on that team that we got spoiled by it. And then this year, it's a little bit more of a, they have to really work for it to get what they need to do.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, it's the Alabama Pregame Show brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. He's John Talty. I'm Simone Eli. Kickoff week 11 of the college football season. Alabama hosts New Mexico State. The Tide getting away from SEC play this week. Appreciate all the comments today. We have one here from a fan. It's not how you start, but how you finish. Let's finish the remainder of the season strong. Alabama silenced the noise. It's a very positive tone from Bama fans, even though there were some frustrations coming out of the LSU game. And it felt as though Nick Saban had very positive tone as well, John. After that loss, after the win, even though it felt like, okay, this is such a close win for Bama, and a win we would like to see Alabama be a lot stronger against a struggling LSU team, it felt as though Nick Saban was pretty upbeat. He was like, okay, hey, yeah, we dealt with this. We came out with a gritty win. It's just a different tone than what we've seen from Coach at times during frustrating years or frustrating games over the last, however many years he's been in Tuscaloosa now.
Yeah, I mean, typically you look at it after a loss, he tries to build him up, and after a win, he brings him down a little bit. That's kind of his typical thing. But I think one of Coach Saban's strongest skills is his ability to read a team and know what they need. And I think based on his comments, you can tell that this team needs confidence. Like, he needs to build them up, even though that they are, they only have one loss and they're the number 2 team in the country. Yeah. Typically, Nick Saban would be trying to bring them down a little bit. Like, you're not that good, like trying to get them to keep working. And he's doing the opposite, which I think speaks to this team's had some problems, I think, in terms of having leaders step up and establish themselves. And I think he seems to recognize that this team has some problems right now, and that he needs to keep trying to build them up and give them some positive energy to move forward. So it's a little unique from what we're used to seeing from Coach Saban, but I think it's what this team needs right now. And I think he's just trying to get them across the finish line.
Sure. So Bama hosts New Mexico State today. New Mexico State's not good. Let's not, beat around the bush here. They're 1-8. This is not going to be like some crazy, amazing shootout game. Bama's over a 50-point favorite at home. With that all in mind, John, where does this team, in your opinion, look to improve the most? Talk about the offensive line, but where can the Tide get better today?
Yeah, I mean, I think offense. It starts at the offensive line because I think it feeds into the next point. Is like after how bad they were in terms of running the ball against LSU, I think you want to be able to establish that better in this game. I think they will be, as you said. I mean, Mexico State's not a great team, but I want to see Brian Robinson running the ball. I want to see be able to kind of get that rhythm going because I think it's going to be important. I think they're going to have to be able to rely on the running game moving forward. It's going to be tough sledding against some of the teams they might face down the stretch. And if they make it to the SEC championship game in particular, like it's going to be very hard to run against Georgia, but you're going to have to be able to. And so, I want to see the offensive line perform better. I want to see the running game, be better. And that's, I think that's the key for what I want to see. I think the defense is going to be fine. I think we saw them step up against LSU. I don't think they're going to have a major problem here, but I do think, a little bit in that back secondary, I think there's been some problems there. There's been some people that they've been able to kind of pick apart. So you hope for maybe some lesser mistakes, some better play back there, not giving up too many big plays or, busted coverages like we've seen in the past.
Sure. Looking ahead for the Tide quickly, after this New Mexico State game, Bama rounds out the season at home against Arkansas, an Arkansas team that has been surprising in moments, maybe not the Arkansas team we thought they were going to be after like the week 4 of the season, thinking they were going to be some sort of like huge contender. And then, of course, the Iron Bowl. When you look at those two games, John, it feels as though everything that Bama wants and needs and their goals are all ahead of them. But it's not going to be easy necessarily, especially if the Tide cannot straighten some things out prior to rounding out those SEC teams.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, I think we all just assume that they will win the remaining 2 games and make it to the SEC championship game in this, 1 versus 2 battle against Georgia. And I think, candidly, I do think that's what ends up happening. But it's not an easy stretch. Arkansas has been a challenging team. I think that they're going to do some things against Alabama that will probably give Nick Saban some headaches. I think that they've shown these moments where they can be pretty good. And Auburn, I mean, and we'll talk about them later. I mean, Auburn's kind of up and down, and I still don't know if they can score enough points to beat Alabama, but they're going to be tough. I think that defense looked very good against Texas A&M, and I think that they've only improved under Derek Mason this year. So that's going to be a tough game. And as we know, I mean, weird things happen at home for Auburn in that Iron Bowl. We saw it, 2 years ago and 2 years before that. And so, you just never know this. If Alabama kind of comes stumbling in after Arkansas, something weird could certainly happen in that game.
Yeah, when you look around the rest of the SEC today in the games, John, you were talking about a game you were looking forward to, 6 o'clock kickoff tonight between Texas A&M and Ole Miss. I'm looking forward to that game as well. Both teams have been really impressive at certain moments in the season, and Texas A&M is very much still playing for the SEC West title, because all it takes is Alabama to slip up one time in these next 2 and A&M to win out, and the Aggies are headed to Atlanta.
Yeah, and I think, their defense has looked great under, Mike Elko. I wrote about him last week. I think he's a guy who will probably get a head coaching opportunity sooner than later. I mean, that defense has been very good this year. And, Georgia gets all the attention, but Texas A&M is right behind them in terms of their defense. They've done a great job. So, that's interesting. I think in terms of Alabama fans, what's interesting about this is that, I'm curious what people would root for, because you probably want to root against, Texas A&M because of course, don't want them to win the SEC West, and Ole Miss is, to this point, Alabama's best win. But Texas A&M continuing to win and looking good, makes that loss look not as bad. Road loss by a couple points. So I'm curious what Alabama fans will be rooting for in that game, but I think it's by far the best SEC game today that I'm looking forward to. And I think it's, I'm just very curious. It's going to be that great chess match between a very fun, high-powered offense on this and then this really great defense at Texas A&M. I'm curious to see who can win that battle.
Yeah. So kickoff in Tuscaloosa is at 11. Over at Auburn, the Tigers host Mississippi State. Kickoff at 11 o'clock there. Sanford is at Florida today. Georgia, Tennessee is the 2:30 CBS game. South Carolina, Missouri, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, like we just discussed. Kentucky, Vandy, and Arkansas, LSU. But John, it's already week 11 of the season. We're midway through November. This is crazy. I feel as though it has truly just flown by. But these next couple of weeks are so important all throughout the entire landscape of college football when it comes to what the playoff scenario, what the postseason bowl games are going to look like.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. I mean, again, like I said earlier, I feel like Georgia's kind of that clear-cut number one, but everybody else just feels so up in the air, which I think is going to be fun down the stretch. Teams are either going to play themselves in or out. And, I think all of the main contenders, whether that's Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, Oklahoma, Cincinnati, they all have flaws. And so I think there's going to be some fun results down the stretch. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see, one or two of those teams go down with a loss. So I'm really excited for the next couple of weeks. I know that, again, this week might not be the most exciting in terms of games across the slate, but the next couple of weeks, we're going to have some fun games. Ohio State, big Michigan, and they have to play Michigan State. I mean, there's going to be some big games down the stretch, and of course in the SEC as well. So I'm pumped up for what we're going to see the next couple of weeks.
No doubt, me as well. Looking forward to it. And even today, here, kickoff in about 90 minutes in Tuscaloosa. So folks headed to the game, have fun, be safe. Folks at home, get some coffee. I always tell you, get some pancakes and bacon. That's my favorite breakfast. Watch some football. Enjoy the win today for the Tide, and then just enjoy the rest of your Saturday. That's what fall Saturdays are all about. It feels good outside. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for tuning into the Alabama Pregame Show, brought to you by Medical Properties Trust. For John Talty, I'm Simone Eli. Have a good rest of your Saturday.